going to get started. Because I know editors are not coming. Susan was sick.
Oh.
Okay. So, before we even get to Talmud, we have to get to the building blocks of everything. So the first thing is Mishnah. So why is any of this important? And I'm just paraphrasing from the book. And the simple answer is, when the temple is destroyed in the year 70, there's nobody left in an official capacity to direct what should and should not be the law. Now, before we get stuck on the word the law, because when I hear that in my head, I think of Sylvester Stallone and Judge Dredd, I am the law. It really wasn't that way at all. But rather, if I'm going to be faithful to the God of Moses and this concept of the teaching, otherwise known as the Torah, and by the time of the year 70, you also have the prophetic books, meaning the second part of the Hebrew Bible. What has not happened yet is the third part of the Bible, because there's a bunch of new books running around now. By the year 70, Mark and Matthew are on the scene, even though it's actually Matthew and Mark, even though they're listed that way. And Luke is coming, because he's year 90, going to as late as 120. So we know they're happening around. And as they're happening around, there's a question of what is legitimate, what's not legitimate. And so we get into this argument of something called written Torah and oral Torah. Written is easy. It's the 5 books. Okay? It is at this point in time the prophetic book. When we say the prophetic books, we're talking about the historical connection using Joshua, Judges, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, and then the prophets themselves from Jeremiah, Isaiah, Ezekiel, and what we call the 12 minor prophets. They're called 12 minor prophets not because they're less in stature, but because their books are very short in length. And the prophets are listed in the order of the length of their books. No, there's no timeline. Malachi is 1 chapter. Obadiah is also 1 chapter, but besides the point. Okay, whereas Hosea and Amos are many chapters. Okay.
So, if a couple of those books are 1 chapter, were they deemed like they're actually that important to canonize them?
Apparently, yes. And now, some of them because they were, most often than not, Malachi in particular is the prophet that, and again, Malachi is not the person's name. Literally means my messenger. We don't know who Malachi is. We have no clue. But Malachi is the last prophet of that generation who was part of the return from exile, giving people, if you will, the high five and say, we're going to be fine.
What makes one guy better than another?
So, by definition, prophecy is you hear the word of God and your prophecy comes true, therefore your word is truthful. Versus you hear the word of God and it never happens. Total sidebar. We all know in our family lines that we deal with issues of genetic deficiencies or clearly problems transport themselves in the family line. So there is a genetic predisposition on my maternal side of depression and bipolar behavior. So my late brother, my late aunt, my cousin, my aunt's oldest son, and we can show you different places, okay? So the point is that just because my uncle, who was a little wackadoodle to begin with, and he's definitely not genetic, he married in, makes a statement, it doesn't mean it's true. And in fact, anything he says is usually not. And so I just take it with a grain of salt. Meanwhile, my cousin, who is under doctor's care, who's doing really well, has a great job. Years ago, he was married. He gave birth. His wife gave birth to a girl. So he has a 6-year-old daughter he's not seen in 5 years, and he is going through the legal process to see her again. Meanwhile, my uncle is making really weird comments and statements, and I said, ignore him. He's not part of your life. Ignore him.
Is this the uncle who was married to your aunt that died?
Yes. There's a lot of baggage. We all have baggage, right? I could write a soap opera by myself and just list my family and change the name to protect the innocent, so to speak. So anyway, so prophecy by definition simply means they heard the word of God and it's true. So what happened was the rabbinic leaders, as the prophetic books were coming together, they have a teaching academy. You have the great academies in Babylon, of course, Hillel and Shammai. It is a generic name. You need to know that. There was a Hillel and there was a Shammai, but there's also a Hillel the elder, the Hillel the younger. It could also be a composite. There was an individual. We're not challenging that. But whether or not is the individual, just like the book of Isaiah. The book of Isaiah is not Isaiah. Isaiah is chapter 1 through 40. Then there's second Isaiah, which is 41 through 60, and there's third Isaiah, or Deutero-Isaiah, for 60 to 72, whatever the number is. But the point is, and again, I'm looking at it from critical scholarship. I'm not looking at it, well, the Torah says this, that's lovely. We'll get there. So the rabbis of the academies, not only in Babylon, but also in Yavna. Yavna would be what we call Tiberius. It's not Sfat, because Sfat's not really that kind of community yet. But they're communicating, and they decided to start taking the oral tradition and writing it down. And what they created, of course, was the Mishnah. And so to cover the first document, by the end of the 2nd century of the Common Era, so from 2 centuries before till 2 centuries after, they start writing an edited document of what is known to be the oral Torah. But here's the problem. The Mishnah is not oral Torah. Mishnah is written Torah and the oral piece of it extended. Then what happened was people would study it, as we like to do with Jews. And if you've been to our Saturday morning class, you know we're going to tangents all the time. Well, that's exactly what happened. And then a new situation would happen that was clearly not in the Mishnah. So someone said, this dialogue is just as educational and just as important as this text. So you have the Mishnah, Shana, Vashinatam, from the Ve'ahata, you shall teach them. That's the teaching. And you have Gemara from the Aramaic. Aramaic is the language of the first, second, third century, which was the vernacular. Hebrew as a spoken language was definitely not happening, because Hebrew is Lashon HaKodesh, the holy tongue. The ultra-Orthodox community outside of worship never speak Hebrew. They only speak Yiddish or really bad English. Okay? And so therefore, Aramaic was the legal language of the first century. The Mishnah and the Talmud is written in Hebrew and Aramaic. Hebrew because it's the text, Aramaic is the interpretation. And I'll show you examples of that. So that learning in Aramaic is Gemara. So you have Mishnah and Gemara together make Talmud. And that's all in your opening document. So now we're going to take a crash course in Jewish history with the development of the Mishnah and the Talmud.
Okay, we're rounding the bend on phase 1 of the crash course in Jewish history, which is the development of Jewish civilization. It's 4,300 years. Let's just do a little review before you finish it up at this phase and get to the Mishnah and Talmud. So here goes. The numbers are 1,000, 1,500, 1,000. 1,000 years from Adam to Noah, 1,000 years from Noah to Abraham. 500 years later we get the Torah at Mount Sinai, and then 1,000 years later we've canonized the books of the prophets and the writings. And then we had the last two numbers, 500, 300. It was 500 years in the prophets and the writings to the giving of the Mishnah, which we're going to talk about today, and 300 years later from the Mishnah to the Talmud. Now in the last video we covered the Second Temple era, which was the major part of this 500 years. We didn't get to the Mishnah, but being that we're going to go from the Mishnah to the Talmud in this section, we'll focus on this and we're going to discuss how we got to the Mishnah and the difference between the Mishnah and the Talmud. Now in order to understand this section, we have to get clear on something which many people aren't aware of, and that is that there were actually two Torahs given to the Jewish people by God to Moses. The first is the written Torah. That's the 5 books of Moses. That's from Genesis all the way through Deuteronomy. We cover that in the crash course in Torah. And then there was the oral Torah. Now what's the difference between the written Torah and the oral Torah? Well, the written Torah recounts the background behind the covenant that the Jewish people entered with God. Right? It starts with creation, everything leading up to what happens at Mount Sinai, and then the first number of years of the Jewish people being in the covenant with God. The oral Torah, which was given by God to Moses, then provides a much more comprehensive understanding of the covenant. So it'll explain the meaning of all the different verses throughout the Torah and give us deeper insight. So for example, when Abraham goes to bind his son Isaac as a sacrifice to God, in the written Torah, that episode is quite terse. There are very few verses giving over what happened. It's in the oral tradition you'll understand the deeper meaning and get a much more detailed presentation of what was going on through that whole event, that whole test. The second difference between the written Torah and the oral Torah is the written Torah lists the 613 biblical commandments. It only lists them. Meaning throughout the 5 books, you're going to find in various parshas of the Torah different commandments. But it's in the oral Torah that you get the explanation on how to fulfill the 613 commandments. So for example, in the written Torah, it tells us, observe the Sabbath day, keep it holy. Well, what does that mean to observe the Sabbath day? What does it mean don't do any work? All that's explained in the oral tradition. What does it mean to keep it holy? Give charity. Well, how much do you give? When do you give it? Who gets first? All that is explained in the oral tradition. Don't kill. Is that always? What about war? Are there ever situations when you're permitted to kill? And so on. What about a court of law? So the written Torah is the listing, essentially, of the biblical commandments. It's in the oral tradition that God explained to Moses how we're supposed to fulfill them. Now, in terms of quantity, the written Torah is about 1% of the entire Torah. It's the oral tradition, which is 99% of our tradition. And that's why it's so important to understand the nature of the oral tradition, which we're going to cover in the crash course in Jewish tradition coming up. One other distinction, which I think is quite obvious, but it's important just to identify, is that the written Torah is read. That's how the Jewish people learned it. The oral tradition was passed down orally for 1,500 years, from parent to child, from rabbi to student. And that's the dynamic of learning. The Torah was read, and then you had this massive tradition which people had to master because they wouldn't write it down, and it had to be given over orally. And that's the way it worked for 1,500 years. So now let's get back to the crash course in Jewish history. So why do we have the Mishnah? So let's understand. The Roman period goes all the way to the year 476 of the Common Era. We saw in the previous video that the Second Temple was destroyed in the year 70 of the Common Era. So the Temple in Jerusalem lay in ruins. Most of the Jewish people have now been exiled from the land a second time. You have a community in Babylon, and you still have a small minority of Jews living in Israel. But it's a time of terrible Roman persecution. And therefore it's very difficult for the Jewish people to maintain this oral tradition orally. And therefore, for the first time, the rabbis realized it was now necessary to write down the oral law. In the year 200 of the Common Era, the Mishnah was compiled. The Mishnah is the code of the oral tradition. What the rabbis did was they wrote short, terse, dense paragraphs of case law, and then a rabbi would study it with their student and analyze the paragraph and bring out the entirety of the oral tradition. They would use that short paragraph of law as a basis then to give over the rest of the tradition orally. It was like a cue card, in a way. The rabbi who led the compiling of the Mishnah was Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, Rabbi Judah the Prince, who was in Israel. He called together 3,000 of the leading sages, many came from Babylon, to participate in now taking the oral tradition and putting it down into written form. But again, I want to point out that they wanted to maintain the oral integrity of the law, which meant they didn't want to make it explicit. You needed a rabbi, teacher, or parent to explain to the student or their child what was intended within that paragraph of the law. Unfortunately, as the exile persisted and the conditions worsened, it was getting difficult even for the Jews to understand what was intended in every single Mishnah. Meaning there was so much oral law packed in that mining all the understanding was still a gargantuan task. And therefore the rabbis realized they had to decode the Mishnah. The decoding of the Mishnah is the Talmud, which was completed in the year 475 of the Common Era. And what I mean by the decoding is that the Talmud is a written discussion of rabbis analyzing every single Mishnah. So by following their discussion and seeing everything they brought out from a Mishnah, we could then maintain our understanding of our oral tradition. Let me give you an example of the difference between Mishnah and the Talmud. Here's a classic case in Jewish law. Two men find a tallis, a prayer shawl, and they both claim that it's theirs. What do you do? So the Mishnah states the following. Two people are holding on to a tallis, that's a prayer shawl. This one says, I found it, and this one says, I found it. This one says, it's all mine, and this one says, it's all mine. Then this one swears that not less than 1/2 of it is his, and this one swears that not less than 1/2 of it is his, and then they split it. So that's a case found in the volume of Jewish law called Bava Metzia, chapter 1, Mishnah number 1. And the Mishnah seems pretty straightforward. But when you open up the Talmud, you realize there's a lot we need to understand. And here's some of the questions the Talmud would ask. First of all, what constitutes finding? Is seeing the object finding it, or do you have to pick it up to take possession of it and find it? Secondly, why the repetition? Why say it's all mine after you said I found it? Obviously, when you say I found something, you mean it's all mine. Third, how are they holding on to it? Are they holding on to the ends? Would it make a difference if this guy's holding on to it over here, this guy's holding on to the end? Fourthly, why swear not less than half of it is theirs? If they both think the whole thing is theirs, why not swear that the whole thing is theirs? Why are they swearing that not less than half of it is theirs? That's a pretty strange way of making the oath. And finally, how do they split it? Do they split it monetarily? Do they split it with the scissors? Those are just some of the questions the Talmud would have on this Mishnah. And believe me, there are pages and pages and pages of Talmud just for this one single Mishnah. So I hope that helps give you a sense of the difference between the two, and we'll talk more about this in the crash course in Jewish tradition. So it's time to do a little review. So here we are in the final 300 years for the Mishnah of the Talmud. Remember, 2 Torahs were given at Sinai, a written Torah and an oral Torah. The written Torah recounts the background behind the covenant the Jewish people entered with God. The oral Torah provides much more of an understanding of the covenant in detail. The written Torah lists the 613 biblical commandments. The oral Torah explains how we're supposed to fulfill them in much greater detail. Basically, the written Torah is 1%, but the oral Torah is 99%. We read the written Torah while the oral Torah was passed down orally for 1,500 years. So why do we have a Mishnah? Well, the Roman period was full of persecution. In the year 70 of the Common Era, the Second Temple was destroyed. It was getting hard to pass on the oral tradition one generation to the next. So the Mishnah was compiled in the year 200 of the Common Era, and that's the coding of Jewish law. But as the conditions of exile grew worse, the rabbis realized they needed to decode the Mishnah for the people, and therefore the Talmud was completed in the year 475 of the Common Era, and that's the decoding of the Mishnah.
Okay. We'll get to that one in a minute. All right, so let's...
So we're supposed to believe that God not only gave us the Torah, but He
Right.
also instilled the written code.
So,
Tim?
it's not that we're supposed to believe it, but yes, it's our tradition. I don't want to deny that. The tradition is Moses came down the mountain with the tablets, but everything else Moses was doing up there was getting all the law, because what do we call the Torah? The 5 books of Moses. And so Moses basically is inscribing this, or at least transmitting it in some form. And then in addition, Moses is the one who gets to understand what it means. So a perfect example is next week's Torah portion, Parashat Yitro, the portion we actually get the commandments in, the 10 commandments. And as our bat mitzvah does so wisely, because I taught her, she says these are not the top 10, but they're 10 of the 613. But she also states in her statement is that the beginning of the portion is Yitro, is named Jethro, in honor of Moses' father-in-law, the Midianite priest, who says, you're a Meshugana. You will let everybody come to you with all their problems, big or small. In other words, he's interpreting their questions based on the oral tradition that he learned. And so as he empowers the tribal leaders, he transmits that. I mean, that's the tradition. Whether it's all literal or not, I'm not worried about that. Clearly, a tradition got passed along the way where here's the written, now how do we understand it? So we're going to look at one thing in there now. So, before we do that, in that packet I gave you, the next full page, you'll see some funny lettering on it. Of the little packet, Okay, yeah, that's one running. Okay? And at the top there, it tells you the Mishnah is in 6 orders. So in English, the Mishnah is in 6 volumes. Okay? And those are the names of the orders. The order we're going to open up today is Nashim. Nashim is women. Each order has X amount of Masechet, or chapters. Like a volume, then you have chapters, or sections. Nashim has Ketubot, the laws of marriage. Kiddushin, the laws of marriage. Gitin, the laws of divorce. There's a couple more in there, I don't remember them all. But my point is, I've got it. So my point is, we're going to look at a Mishnah now, first. Okay? And we're going to look at, like I said, Nashim. So we're going to look at actually Kiddushin. So turn the page and you will see a piece of paper that says Tractate Kiddushin. Okay? So,
Is there a reason why it's so similar to Kiddush?
So the word Kiddush means, or Kadash, is the root, Kuf Dalet Shin, holy, special, set aside. The Hebrew word for marriage is Kiddushin because you are setting yourself aside from everybody else. Okay? So now, here's the Mishnah. So Kiddushin only has 4 chapters. It's not a long Mishnah. Okay? But you can see it's one big paragraph. Okay? So the Mishnah is the woman is acquired by 3 means, and she regains her freedom by two methods. So you remember the video, he says, the guy said it's mine, the guy said it's mine. If you don't know anything else and you're reading this, you have no clue what you're talking about. Aside from the fact, Haisha nikenet v'shalosh v'rachim, literally the woman is acquired in three ways, three methods. And so the idea is that the expression, the man acquires the woman, is not used to show that she cannot be betrothed without her full consent. So, in the text, what does it actually say? It says a man leaves his house, his parents' house, and cleaves to his wife. So they want to know what it means to cleave. Okay? So by two methods. She's acquired by money, or by document, or by sexual connection. So how do we say that in the Hebrew? In the money, the kesef, the bishtar is the document, and of course via or bia is sexual intercourse. So you already know what they are. The money is exchanging something of value. That's the rings. The document is the ketubah. That's a whole other Mishnah. And by the way, there's a Mishnah on the ring. And bia is bia. There's a whole section on how to have sex. Okay? Well, yeah, there was no Netflix yet. Okay? Now, by money, the school of Shammai say by a dinar or by a dinar's worth. So here's one of the problems: is we don't really know today what a value or a full value of a dinar is. So let's just say it is $100, and we can do that for now. But Hillel says by a pruta or a pruta's worth. So what's a pruta? Because that I can answer. A dinar was always a coin. A pruta was an object the size of a healthy, large olive. So a pruta, for our purposes today, is the thumb of your dominant hand. So I'm right-handed, so it'll be the size of my right thumb. Now, to be fair, that's only going to be based on male standards. There is no pruta equated with a woman's size. So dinar is considered physical money that we understand today, coinage, whereas pruta was a mass. Okay? And so 1/8 part of an Italian isar. Already you know the translation is modern. How do you know this?
Italian.
Exactly. Okay?
Does it say it's silver or gold? What is this?
So the note here, and I'm sorry, I thought I copied that page, but I didn't, because I really only wanted to keep the Mishnah part of it, but we'll get to other, we're going to see it again. We're going to see it again, okay? But, right, I mean, I'm looking at Ba'isar, but well, it says here, Echad Mishmona, so 1/8, Ba'isar Ha'itachi. The fact that it said Italian, they don't know what Italians are, but they do know something. What are they, where are they living? Well, exactly, they're not in Rome, but that's the influence. So Italki is Italian in the sense that it's Roman related, but we have no clue what that really means, other than it was some Roman value. So one of the challenges when we do Mishnah and then later on Talmud, and even later with Rashi, we're going to get references that they understand in their day.
Okay.
I
That
don't
we
know
don't.
anything was called Italy then. It was the Roman Empire.
No, it's not. That's what I'm saying. Italki is an Italian, I mean, there may be the word Italian or whatever that later became Italy.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is we know they're under Roman occupation, so for them to insert a Roman word is not so strange. Okay? Furthermore,
But it doesn't say the purity of the silver or the purity of the gold if it's 14 karat or
correct,
whatever.
okay? We all know that the more pure the gold is, it softens. So you don't want gold to be too pure, right? Because then it's actually less valuable, even though carat-wise it's more valuable. And she recovers, okay, so again, all we have is the dollar amount. There's no discussion here about the document, because that's another. And there's no discussion here about biyah, because that's another. The only thing they're about here now is money. And she recovers her freedom by a letter of divorce, that's a get, or on the death of her husband. There is no other way. Now, so far all we know is, or what we're looking at here is, we're trying to understand what the financial acquisitions are. We understand how she acquired, and does she have a say? In our tradition, of course she does. Okay? We may not think so, but the answer is yes. But we also know to dissolve a marriage, there is divorce, but she has no empowerment to dissolve the divorce. Only if she recovers by a letter of divorce. She can't issue it. Okay? The widow's sister-in-law is acquired by sexual intercourse, and she obtains her release by chalitza or on the death of the brother-in-law. So, there is one other piece, and that's from Leviticus. Did they give me a cross-reference here? We'll see in the Talmud, I promise. I'll use myself. So Samantha and I are married, and I had 2 brothers at the time. And if for any reason that I died before we had our first child, according to biblical law, my brother would have been obligated to marry her to produce an heir for me, because he's from the same male line. So that is what the procedure of chalitza is. I'm sorry, that's the procedure of what we call a yavamot, and that's the other section of this nashim. That just popped in my head. Dealing with all those laws.
Is this the levirate marriage?
It's a levirate marriage, but in Hebrew it's yavamot. That's why it just popped in my head. And she can do an act of chalitza, which means she takes his shoe off and spits in it, i.e. spitting on the seed. So he doesn't want to do it, but she has to do this grotesque act. Or, God forbid, my brother dies. Now, that's a reference to the text in Genesis between throwing Joseph in the pit and the saga continuing with him in Egypt after Potiphar. And Judah leaves. Judah has a son who's married to Tamar. The son dies. Then he has a second son who Tamar marries because he died. His name is Onan. Onan now has the connotation of masturbation because he dies too. He spilled his seed. He has a third son, but much, much younger. He's not ready yet. So, when it's time, you'll get him. Time came, he's like, no, man, she's Black Widow. She's already knocked off 2 of my guys. So she gets in costume and pretends to be a harlot, a prostitute, sleeps with him. So she slept with her father-in-law, and she gets pregnant. And he tries to get her stoned to death or burned to death, and then realized she was right and he was wrong. And her child's name is...
Obed?
Wait a minute. Huh?
Obed? No.
How about
Thank you. You're on the right line. It's that line. It's the line that will eventually become King David.
Paris?
Say Perez. Thank you, Perez. Yeah, because Obed, I think, is the one after that. Maybe either Obed or Perez, but it's the line of King David.
Was there any way for her to get divorced to get out of this situation where she had to wait for the younger brother?
She had to wait for the third brother to be of age to say, I'm not doing this, and then spit on
And
his...
then she could divorce.
Yeah, but until that, right, that's the problem.
Meanwhile, she's trapped in the...
Correct.
Well, spin in the shoe, right?
Right, but she couldn't do it until the younger son was of age. And he had to be 13, he wasn't 13 yet. And now he's 13, so why didn't she go to him and do this rather than trick her father-in-law? Because financially, probably was better off to go with her father-in-law. Now,
What happened if you didn't have a brother?
then you're absolved.
She goes back to her family
She
home.
goes back to her
right?
family, whoever they do, either the dowry, or she can remarry. And ultimately, that's what they want to do. They want to get her remarried. That's the whole point. So yeah, that's not a problem. Again, step aside for a minute. In this particular story, it has to happen. Because Judah is the line that will link to King David. It's the line that will eventually get to Jesus if you believe that lineage in the New Testament. And so, from a narrative perspective, it has to happen. But from a Jewish law perspective, it's giving us some discourse on understanding how Jewish marriage is supposed to work. Okay? So the mission is very straightforward. In the Mishnah, you also get difference of opinion. You get Shammai, you get Hillel. Or you get, you get Shammai. Others, you'll get Rabbi Judah, you'll get Rabbi Ariel, it doesn't matter, Akiva. The Mishnah is okay with that.
Can I
And that's what they're talking about.
tangent for a second? Well, we probably talked about this, and you're talking about the Judah and Tamar, which is in Genesis.
Yes.
When you get to Leviticus, then we get all the laws of who can
Chapter
have
18,
sex
you're
with
absolutely
whom.
correct.
And you can't have sex with your father-in-law, right?
No, you cannot.
But that's after the Judah and
So
Tamar.
again, right, it was after the fact, and again, so that goes back into those categories of forbidden and prohibited. Forbidden is you cannot, you will not, and the punishment is death or whatever, whatever, right? Prohibited is you should not, but if you choose to do it, you will be out of the community, but we're not going to dissolve the marriage. So intermarriage is not forbidden, but is prohibited by definition. And intermarriage has not become an issue, because everything's intermarriage in the Torah, if you think about it. Right? Outside the first cousins of the early Genesis stories, is when Ezra and Nehemiah come back to rebuild what becomes the second temple. They said, everybody who's not married to an Israelite, you must divorce your spouse. And that's what the text tells us. Now, whether it really happened or not, different story. Okay. All right, so that's Mishnah. Again, I gave references from various sections of the Torah. So from that, and I realized, I don't know why I got copied the way it did, but it did. I actually gave you the introduction to explain betrothal and so forth. Kiddushin, the Hebrew word for marriage. Marriage actually at one time was two separate ceremonies. There was Irusin, or betrothal, and there was Nisuin, which is the actual marriage. But back in the day, Irusin would happen, and a year later, Nisuin would happen. You could not have sexual relations until the second part. Now, the question is, okay, and this is also in the Talmud, if they had sexual relations before the second part, are they not married based on this Mishnah? And the answer is they are, but it would avoid any adulterous behavior. In the medieval period, or before that I should say, I think around 9 or 1000, the rules were changed so that it's not 1 year apart but at the same time. Why? Because if a man disappeared, the woman was called aguna, or chained. She could not marry again because there's no one to give her a divorce. And there's no way to prove that he died if he disappeared. Now, they disappeared sometimes they were kidnapped and taken in military conscription. Other times, they weren't interested and they disappeared. So, all right. Before we jump to Talmud, let's do another crash course, why the Talmud became important in our history.
Okay, we're about to finish the first phase of Jewish history, which is the development of Jewish civilization. And in the last video, we spoke about the development of the Talmud that happened right before the fall of Rome in 476 of the Common Era. And we also discussed the difference between the Talmud and the Mishnah. So I hope it was clear from the last video. But I want to bring out one more point about the Talmud and its significance as we're about to prepare to go into the Middle Ages, which is going to be a very difficult time. So we've now taken a look at Jewish history from ancient times, and now we're about to go into the Middle Ages, which is a time of tremendous persecution and exile. There'll be two different types of hardships, which we're going to discuss. There's going to be religious persecution and economic hardships. We'll go into detail in the next phase of Jewish history. But the major challenge is we're going from a nation that had been living in its own land for so many years, and now we're going to be scattered to the four corners of the world for a very long time. So how are the Jewish people going to maintain any sense of unity? And that's where the Talmud comes in. Cecil Roth is a British historian, and he says the following thing about the Talmud. He says the Talmud is not just a code of Jewish law, and it's also not just a code of the Jewish religion. He says what the rabbis achieved by writing the Talmud is that they wrote the code of Jewish civilization. Because when you open up the pages of the Talmud, you not only get into issues of law, but it also includes what's called a Gadata, which gives you a close-up look at the life of the Jewish people within the land of Israel. You get to see the spirit that happened in the study halls. You get a close-up look at the discussions between the prophets. You get to see life in the marketplace of the Jewish people throughout the land of Israel. So the Talmud helps the Jewish people maintain our understanding of what was achieved during this phase of our history. It's going to help us secure our life, our values, our culture, our morality as we go through foreign lands with foreign cultures and ideas, and it's there to provide the vision of what we're meant to rebuild and recapture and reclaim when we eventually make it back to the borders of our own land and settle once again as a Jewish people within the Holy Land of Israel. So that's why the Talmud is the centerpiece of Jewish learning. So we've now completed phase 1 of Jewish history, and we're about to get into phase 2, the Middle Ages.
Okay. So it's what is considered to be the continuity that kept us going from generation to generation with regard to having an identity as the Jewish people. So now, trying to think the easiest way to get into the Talmud. And I thought this was the best way to go. So, the next page of your handout, you should be able to open up the handout. You have one side in English and one side in the facsimile of the Talmud page. Okay? So, rather than make you crazy, there's a wonderful website that can do the same thing. Okay? So first and foremost, you all have a handout. In Hebrew, in the box at the top, it says Ha'isha. If you recall, the beginning of the Mishnah, it said, Ha'isha nechanet b'shalosh drachim v'kona het azma b'shtei drachim. A woman can be acquired in 3 ways, and she can be released or sent away in 2 ways. It's the Mishnah. All right, now, before we get too far away, I have to do this here when you look above. So, if you look at the top of the page where this cursor is now, this particular page of the Talmud is Tractate or Masechet Megillah. So it's actually in Tractate Moed, seasons, okay? So in our case, if you look at the word, it's Kiddushin. Very top of the page is upside down the back, so you know, so you don't go crazy. So the very top of the page where it said Kiddushin, we're in Tractate Kiddushin. Does everybody see where I am? All right. To the right of it is Perek, in this case Echad, or chapter, or Perek Rishon, excuse me, first chapter. Here in this case is 3rd chapter. Now, if you look at the far right, it says Ha'isha Nechanet. Why does it say that? Just like every Torah portion has a name based on a word or 2 in the first line, the Mishnah and the Talmud is written the same way. So that I'm looking at any particular page of the Talmud, like this one, I know that I'm in Megillah, chapter 3, and or the 3rd, but I'm looking at the 3rd Mishnah, and the 3rd Mishnah in this case is Hakarei Omed, which is literally means reading while standing. So that particular page of Megillah. In this case, the woman is granted, connected, whatever. Okay? There's a reason why I'm not translating it completely, because that's what the Talmud's going to do for us. All right. Over here, you see 2 Hebrew letters, a Kaf and a Resh. The Hebrew letters have numbers on the screen. So in yours, you should only see a bet. Okay? In this particular, Kaf is 20. Resh is 80. Okay? But that can't be right. And in fact, it's not a Resh. It's a Dalet. It's a bad print. Because you would not write it that way. So it's Kaf, Dalet, so it's 24. It's page 24A. Here you have page 2A. There is no page 1A or 1B in the Babylonian Talmud. In the Yerushalmi Talmud, which is another compendium that was created at the same time in Israel versus in Babylon, there is a page 1A and 1B. A means if you're opening up a Hebrew document, it's going to be on the left-hand side when you're looking at a 2-page spread. And then you flip it over. The B page, in this particular print, there is no page number. But I turn back to the previous page, or I look across, and it'll say Gimel. So that is 2B, 3A. Yes?
Okay, since this has page numbers, when did they make the decision not to make the Torah with page numbers? That you gotta stand there and roll.
Got to the scroll. Okay, so one has nothing to do with the other, believe it or not. Okay.
Was there a discussion on that though?
The answer is no, because the Torah scroll is just that. It's the written law from the beginning of Genesis to the end of Deuteronomy. Don't forget, the whole idea of chapters and verses, that's much later. That's the Masoretes. And in fact, that's going on at the same time this is happening. So as far as having page numbers in the scroll, it never probably entered their minds. It wasn't necessary, because it's one continuous document. I'll give you a perfect example. Is next week, only because I'm working right now on this. Yitro, the way the Plout commentary did the commentary on it, the first 3 commandments is one section, Shabbat is another section, and then honoring your parents and everything is a 3rd section. So everybody in the congregation is going to have to keep turning pages as I'll announce them. Yeah. Whereas in the new version, they didn't do that. They made it all one continuum. Mm-hmm. So my suspicion is, at one time, it was a non-issue. It was just continuum.
It wasn't discussed.
The pagination here is actually due to the printing press. This was handwritten, obviously, and it's a huge document, and so therefore they had to be able to get control of it. Otherwise, they would not be able to know where they were. And then when they went to the printing press, the pagination was required.
But the printing press is like the Gutenberg Bible,
Right.
it's later. So isn't the Talmud much earlier than the Gutenberg Bible?
In the written form, it is earlier than the Gutenberg Bible. Absolutely. It's at the 6th century of the Common Era. But the printing press for it, though, is not until, what, 11 something, I think?
Yeah,
Or
later.
10? Yeah, I mean, so
So
the
how
first
did
one
they-
was actually in Vienna or
So
something
people
like that.
hand copied this.
Oh, yeah.
Monks.
So the pagination was to keep track of it. Really all it was.
And
Yeah.
they were in exile, so how did they transport these pages and pages?
Well, so just like the oral tradition had been passed on, people memorize this stuff. Now, I have to give a perfect example. Dr. Benzion Buchholder of blessed memory was one of my Talmudic professors, grew up in Orthodox yeshiva. Okay? Unfortunately, he suffered from severe macular degeneration, but he had a computer screen.
Like your TV screen.
I can do this. Why not? In this. Okay. There we go. Right. So you see, I mean, his computer screen, I think, did like 10 times this, so that he could see. Of course, you don't read more than one word at a time because everything was so blown up. Let me go back to what I need to do. And I'll actually blow it back up again in a second for you. My point is, but we would study Talmud. So looking at this page, he would say, Lawrence, read. I'll go, how you should have done, and I'll go, and he go, and then, oh, that word is this. I'm like, and then he would go, okay, I want you to tell me what Rashi says. And then tell me what Tosefah, I mean, he knew every nook and cranny on this page. And I don't want you to think we only studied this. We studied lots of folios. Folios is the phrase given for each page of Talmud. Okay? So yeah, there was a memorization. Obviously, the transport memorization did happen. And again, we know during the time of the Inquisition and other time, the Talmud was burnt. Was set in flames. But now it wasn't the only copy. Okay? Alright, so we got the top, pagination, and all that fun stuff. Yes? Okay, I'm doing this way on purpose. Now, on the top right of the page, you'll see little letters. And what's nice about this, it's going to tell me. Click here to read more about the Mesoret Hashas, which is a cross-reference Talmudic literature. So I'm going to click it. And I have to do this so we can see it. Sorry. Alright. That's weird. I'm not sure why that's happening like that. Anyway, the terminology, and you have it in the English part that I gave you, is that the Shas, that the phrase says Mesoret Hashas, excuse me, is a Hebrew acronym for the expression Shisha Sedarim, or the 6 orders of the Mishnah, denoting the 6 main areas in which the Mishnah and Talmud are divided. It does become a synonym for Talmud, particularly at a time the Talmud was banned by Christian censors. The original title of the work was, in fact, Mesorah HaTalmud. Mesorah means tradition, as in Masorti, but also alludes to the Masorah, the scholarly discipline that concerned itself with precise transmission of each word and letter of the Bible. So, as in the Masoretes, that's the same group of people. They wanted to make sure that everything was kept as pure as possible. This actually dates between 1546 and 1551. Rabbi Joshua Boaz Maboch was a Spanish exile living in Italy, and Italy was the place. And so he does a cross-reference to where it is in the Talmud page. So, in yours, what the cross-reference is everything you see on the right-hand side. And there's always blank space that we can also write our own. So, a couple of pages ago, I gave you a document that was all this funny-looking script called Rashi script. Rashi script is the script that was created so that you would know that the commentary was from Rabbi Shimon ben Yitzchak, Rashi. He did not write in this script in any way, shape, or form. He had nothing to do with it. It was actually a creation of the printing press later. I gave you the code so you can see. Most of the letters look the same, but obviously certain letters do not. The bet is not the same, the shin is not the same, and so forth. And so, on your document, it said, Ediot, Pesach Daled, 47, Beketubot, 50b. So how do I know that? So it's telling me that there's a cross-reference there to the text in 447, and it's saying it's in Ketubot, which is another tractate of the Talmud, and it has the letter Nun. Nun is for the number 50, it has 2 dots. If it's 1 dot, it's folio A. If it's 2 dots, it's folio B. Okay? Again, I'm not looking for you to master all the mini print. I'm not looking to master any of this in the moment. Okay? Just want you to understand how it all works. So, we're going to go back now to the beginning.
How come some of the
Say again?
how come some of the words are bolded and larger?
We're going to do that right now. So you see here the letter Mem, Tav, Nun, Yud, which in your document does not exist at all on either side. That means Mishnah, Mataneh. Okay? It means Mishnah. And in fact, the word, and this is a traditional Mishnah with other commentary on it, and that's why there has this here. And but this all it really means to repeat or to teach, to understand. Okay? And then after the Mishnah is introduced, as you see here, go back to the top here, you see the letters Gimel, Mem. That stands for Gemara. And in ours, we have it, right? You have the Mishnah, and then you see Gimel, Mem right there, fat in the middle. So it tells you where the Mishnah starts and ends, and where the Gemara continues. Okay? And we're going to look at it, because I gave you the English translation to this. We're going to look at it in a minute. Okay? On the right-hand side of the page, keeping in mind, in a book, this is on the left-hand side. So you know what? In a book, this is what this looks like. Let's read this right. Yeah. So in a book, I'm holding the book, and now I'm going to turn the page, and that's the other side. And now we got page 3 here. So, in the book, when the Hebrew's on the left-hand side, Rashi is on the right of it. When the Hebrew's on the right-hand side, Rashi's on the left. Or, Rashi is always closest to the fold. Because on the outside is Tosefot, or other commentaries. So, in your wonderful Islamic reading, there is one section I want to go over, which is why I marked it. So, you have the Mishnah. We already know the earliest rabbinic texts that take the oral tradition and gave us a listing of the laws to understand them. On the right-hand side, meaning away from the Rashi, in this case the left-hand side, you have the Tosefta, which literally means a supplement. Collection of older traditions similar to the Mishnah. Because Rabbi X said this, Rabbi Y said this, we make sure we don't lose their teaching, their understandings. And certain sections seem like commentaries, certain sections have nothing at all, other than they want to make a connection. Okay? There is a Baraita. I think we'll get one in our English translation. A Baraita is in the name of, I have this teaching from somebody else. Or, my personal favorite, I once heard a story. Or, I once was in another place and this is what they did. Those are Baraitas. Or, in a simple way, e.g., for example. I'm taking my explanation based on an example. So, totally different, okay? When you have a Chaver Kadisha, meaning a Jewish burial society, you have a men and a women, because you're not supposed to see the nakedness of the other, especially when they're dead, when they have no control over their modesty. I was the rabbi of the Chaver Kadisha in Delaware for 5 of the 6 years that I lived there. And when we were preparing a woman's body, I would stand outside the door. And I would do the prayers and hear certain sounds to know where they were in the process. But I did not enter into the room. If it was a man, I was in the room doing the prayers and or washing and doing the prayers at the same time. Okay? Rabbis, I have a question for you. I've got a new one now. What Chaver Kadisha do I deal with if I have a transgendered person or someone in transition? We are going to deal with this. The Orthodox are like, what the hell are you talking about? Right? But those are the questions they did not have an understanding. So this is where we are now adding our own variety. Well, when I was in North Dakota, whatever, and you share whatever experience, I was in North Dakota for 2 years, you share the experience of what you know and how you applied it. As a liberal rabbi, sometimes I do make decisions based on my gut and not necessarily based on what law says, because I want to be, as Vriehoff would say, as humanitarian and modern as possible. But there has to be something in our tradition. Rabbi Jeff Salkin, who was a guest here a couple years ago, wrote an article, which he's right, is one of the criticism of liberal Reform Judaism, in particular when it comes to social justice. Tzedek, tzedek, tirdov, justice, justice, you shall pursue, cannot be the catch-all for everything we do. Because technically that's not what it means. It meant that when in a court of law you pursue justice, you don't let the person with the most money dictate the process, and you don't let the evidence be the sole source, but you also inject or interject a level of humanity. That's what it really meant. But for us to say, to have clean air, well, because it says justice, justice shall pursue, it's stretching a lot. I'm not saying we shouldn't keep doing that, but let's be honest to what our tradition really stands for. So the Baraita was the lesson, that which is transmitted. We all live it every day. Well, my grandmother used to do it this way. We live it, okay? The Tana, the Amora, are generations of rabbinic leaders. So the Tananim were called the repeaters, meaning they were the first generation after the great leaders, so they're repeating what they heard or what they experienced, versus the Amorim, which took the lessons of the Tanaim and discussed it, and they're called the discussers. So you have the repeaters and the discussers.
Are they unnamed? They're just grouped? Like
They're given named and or group. The Tanaim said this, the Amorim said this, or certain rabbis. So if they were at the period of the 1st century following the destruction of Jerusalem, they're considered that level, versus the rabbis who are now a generation later, who are mostly in part of the writing of the Gemara. So Rabbi Akiva said in the name of Rabbi Joshua, Akiva is the Amorite, the Amora, versus Joshua being the Tana. Okay? There are 2 types of law, and you need to understand this. We'll get much more into detail on the second type when we do Midrash. It's called halakha. The word halakha means to walk. You're halech, to walk, to move. You're walking in God's ways. In other words, your actions are reflected what God wants. And then there's the agata, which is what he said, or the agadic. That is the narrative that explains the Jewish law. So I'll give you a simple example. The halakha, you shall not boil a kid in his mother's milk. The agada says, you don't take a baby goat and boil it in the mother milk, meaning you don't derive from that mother twice. So can you take a baby goat from another mother and boil in that mother's milk, because it's not the same? The agadic would be the narrative, and then eventually the rabbinic tradition made it no milk and meat, which of course is not what the text tells us. So that's one of those challenges. Okay. Did that, and finally that was that. Okay. So I want you to understand the 4, the 5, whatever types of things. So going back to this, that's Rashi in this case. That's the Tosefta in this case. The only other thing I'm going to point out to you now, before we get into the text, is all this stuff is Ein Mishpat. Ein Mishpat Ner Mitzvah. So I'm sorry, let me go back.
Left.
What do you mean? This stuff on the outside. So look where the page number is.
yeah.
And if you look at the top of that document that you have, where the page number is, you'll see the Hebrew word in little letters, Ein Mishpat Ner Mitzvah. You see where I am?
Mm-hmm.
Okay? And so what that's all about is that there's a cross-reference so you understand what the actual mitzvah or commandment is. So for example, and this is kind of hard to read and I know that. So in our document where it says Ha'isha, it's telling me Aleph 1, and I have to blow this. And by the way, I didn't wear glasses until I studied Talmud the first time, and that was it. My Perek Aleph chapter 1, come on, give me the cross-reference. And Teshua. I have to go look it up again, I'm sorry. I don't remember, but it's a cross-reference in the different mitzvot of the 613 that were enumerated by Moses Maimonides. And like the Mishnah Torah, so that's where that's coming from. Or other mitzvot as declared in time. So the date of this is 1546 also. So it's 16th century. Okay? And then later on the page, sorry, one thing I need to explain. So please note the structure. The Talmud is in the middle. Always is.
You mean the Mishnah?
Mishnah and Gemara is always in the middle. That's why I'm saying the Talmud. Okay? There always will be a clean line separating Rashi from Tosefta. And likewise, there's a clean line between the Tosefta and the text, and between the text and Rashi. Always. At the bottom of the page, like this one, you will see that the same thing applies, but then you see the Tosefta kind of goes around, and Rashi stops. So you will notice the bottom of Rashi, you see one little word. So look at our text. Look at the Rashi, and then you'll see one word by itself. Okay, everybody see that?
Mm-hmm.
All right. That word is benitne. Flip your page over. Rashi again starts on the left-hand side of this one. If you notice, what's the first word? Benitne. It's basically telling us what the next statement should be. Sometimes it's not a new statement like it is in this one. Sometimes it's a continuation of a sentence. It's the easiest way to find it. This is all thanks to the printers. It has nothing to do with anything. Okay? But there's so much material here. All
Do
right.
they all look the same no matter where they're printed, or?
All the same now, yeah. They've been, since they were first printed, yes. That printer, and I know there's a name, and maybe in there, I don't remember, set the standard for this. Now, it was handwritten this way. It did not have all these other commentaries. They were actually added later. We are still adding. Likewise, look at the Mishnah and the Talmud and the Gemara. You see here at the bottom of this one? In ours, it has I, Aleph Yud. Flip it over, and what's the first word? I. It's always going to give you a reference of what's next. Now, the only thing I need to explain in complete to you, the bottom here, the very bottom,